Well, welcome everybody to Healthy Relationships and Conflict Resolution. I've been working in the American Fork area for 5 years now, and I've been married for almost the exact same amount of time. I got my job and I got married all in the same month, actually. So it was an exciting month. And my marriage has been steadily improving because of the stuff that I'm going to talk to you about tonight. I remember at the beginning of our marriage, we were on our way to Walmart in the car talking about whatever. And I was talking about how my favorite version of Don't Stop Believing was by Glee. I was telling her, like, it's clearly superior. Have you seen, it was like one of the first episodes of Glee, right? So you've got all these kids who are like hand-picked because they can sing well. And they've got such powerful, strong voices, and they harmonize. And if you listen to it, the beats per minute, just a little bit. The song's faster than the original. And when they hit, it was like, it just, ooh, waves of emotion. I was like, yes, I feel something now. And she's like, well, I think Steve Perry has a powerful voice. And I'm like, no, he doesn't. He doesn't have a powerful voice. He's kind of a raspy, it's not a powerful voice. And we're going back and forth, and I'm like, what do you even mean by powerful? What is that? I'm just trying to like get her to define what she's talking about. And he's like, I don't know, it's powerful. I think it's powerful. I'm like, well, define it. And she's not. And I'm just like, well, give me your best argument here, you know? And I look over at her, and I can see that something has changed in her face, and I go, oh crap, what have I done? Because now we're having a fight. It is no longer about which version is the best version of that song. We're having a fight, and we're about to go in and grocery shop, and that's always a fun experience, right? So conflict can come out of nowhere, seemingly. You can just be like, how did this happen? Like, 1 minute we're talking about Journey versus Glee, and now we're fighting? Why? And it's confusing, and it's frustrating. And this is something that everybody struggles with. And it tends to get worse as time goes on. If you have conflict in a relationship, any kind of relationship, it usually goes downhill. And in a marriage, at first, maybe you bicker a little bit and you start fighting and it gets a little hotter. Then things seem to get better. But what's really happened is you're tired of fighting with each other, and this can happen over the course of years. You're tired of fighting, and so you just stop talking about stuff. And there starts to be this sense of distance. You feel isolated from each other, and there's kind of a coldness that sets in. You're drifting further and further apart, and soon you're feeling like you're just roommates. And if that goes on long enough, usually it ends in divorce. People split up, the relationship dies, there's just nothing holding it together anymore. That's happening all over the place. Thinking about all of the families that have been broken by conflict can be absolutely overwhelming. And then you think about the ones that stay together, and not all of them are perfect. I remember watching my parents, and they've just always kind of had like a distance. They're fairly stable in that I think they're going to stay together, but it's not like a strong, amazing connection between them. They're not a great model of love and emotional intimacy. I know that you've probably seen this. You've seen this happen in your friends, your family, right? Like, this is something that you're aware of. Maybe it's the sibling you have that you can't stand. Or maybe it's an ex where you got really bad blood with them. Or maybe you got a kid that doesn't want to talk to you much anymore. This is happening all over the place. And these rifts caused by conflict make everyone suffer much wider than just the people going through it. My brother divorced last year, and that has been a real experience for everyone in the family, all the siblings, my parents. My mom has had to move out to California to help with his kids. It's impacted each one of us, and it's made us sick to our stomachs. We've had a lot of emotions to work through, a lot of bitterness towards his ex, and we're watching how the children are getting hurt. And it's scary to think how monkey see, monkey do. The kids are watching what happens, and they're going to be more prone to repeat that in the future if nothing changes? What happened to my best friend? I used to go over to my buddy's house every Thursday night, and we would watch The Office and Parks and Recreation and Community. It was like the best night of the week. Thursdays are a good day, right? And I would watch them have these little fights where they bicker, and she'd say something, and he'd be like, "Oh, babe, gosh," and there'd be like silence between them. It's awkward, you know. I'm sitting there just watching it. Also, you know, I'm going through my bachelor's degree of marriage or child and family studies. I'm seeing this dysfunction, and I'm like, something's broken here, but I don't know what to do. And I had him take some assessments from John Gottman and look at like love languages, but I didn't really know what to do. And I went off to my master's degree in South Carolina, and he calls me up halfway through the program and he says, "We're getting divorced." And it was just heartbreaking because, like, this is my best friend and I don't know how to help him. You know, all of my classmates talk about how we have imposter syndrome. You know, when we graduated, we didn't feel like we were ready. We didn't feel like we knew what we knew. We didn't know what to do to really help people. There's so many theories to make sense of, so many different models of how to work with a marriage. And making all the pieces fit together and make it simple and clear, it's really difficult. And, you know, there's books out there, lots of popular books by researchers like John Gottman, who has done the real work on what makes a marriage work and not. 7 Principles of Making Marriage Work, I think, is one of his books. You know, and people read that, and I'm thinking, how can people make sense of all of this if the people who go through grad school have a hard time making sense of it? And so I was doing my best for the first couple of years of my practice, trying to share what I knew and what I know, trying to help people heal their relationships and help with their conflict. And I did a lot of presentations at the library. I did them down in Orem and Provo, and they were terrible. They were so boring. I was just dumping information. That first presentation I did in Orem, I think I had 45 people show up. And for part 2, there were like 8. Nobody wanted me to come back after that. I kept focusing on this and kept trying to think, like, what are the essential ingredients of how to make a relationship work? I wanted people to be able to walk away and start to change. And it took me a couple years, but I have finally figured it out. And I think finally been able to make it simple enough that you can hear it and go, "Oh," and it sticks. Now, I can't explain every detail. I wish I could give you everything you needed to completely transform your relationships in an hour, but not going to happen. But I've thought to myself, okay, if I have 1 hour to talk to people, what's the most important first and basic step that I can give them?
You can go see Kenneth in his office for that.
Right. So that's what you're going to get tonight. The first basic steps that you can take. Because of what you're going to learn tonight, you will start to have more power to be able to change things in your relationship. Not complete transformation, but definitely the first step. And what I'm going to teach you tonight is what I have been using in my own marriage, and it's what's making my marriage work and get better. We don't really have the fights like we used to. Our first year of marriage was rough. I mean, we fought all the time. And actually, let me pull up my fight counter here, because I have been keeping track of every fight that we have ever had. I missed a couple, but we're up to around 166 right now. And most of those were the first 2 years. They've really slowed down. But I've been looking to those as learning experiences to see how I can improve and make things better. I'm not perfect at it. I still definitely fail at this often. But I would say for the most part, I am non-reactive. If I have a superpower, that's it. Our fights usually don't escalate much because a fight always takes 2 people. And if only one person refuses to escalate, then the fight really can't go anywhere. It's kind of like dancing. If you're waltzing with somebody and you just stop, they might keep moving, but you're not dancing anymore. So if only you know, maybe you wish that you were here with somebody else listening to be able to hear this stuff. It doesn't matter. If only you understand what we're going to talk about tonight and start to implement it, you can make a massive shift. If you be the one that refuses to be reactive, things will change. The fight's not going to be able to go anywhere, and you can start to work on repairing things. So that's what you're going to get tonight. The beginnings of how to be non-reactive, which I think is one of my secrets to success as a husband. So being reactive then is why we have problems in the first place. My buddy just texted me, and his wife came home, and he had just put in a new sink, and he called it, but he was busy. She was on a trip, a girls' trip, and he's taking care of all the kids, including their 2-year-old, trying to feed him and get him to bed. And she's like, "Oh, what's all this on the sink?" And he's like, "Well, it's caulk." "Well, why is it here?" "Well, because I didn't have time." She was doing things that could have easily caused a fight, but because he chose to be non-reactive, it didn't go anywhere. He could have been like, "I can't believe you would criticize me for this. You've been on a girls' trip this whole weekend, and I have been trying to fix our house and make it better, and all you can do is point out the problems." That would have been a totally different experience, and really much worse than it was, because he's working on being non-reactive too. So let's start with, why are we reactive in the first place? What makes that happen? I'm going to show you some pictures, and I want you to look at them and just like notice your inner reactions when you see them. And let me see, I'm going to have to open this up first, and then I will share it with you. I want you to see what kind of gut instinct you have as you look at these pictures. When you see that? You look at the emotions she's conveying. Think about what it feels like. And look at this one. What kind of reactions would you be having if that was you? If somebody you loved looked at you like this, what would that feel like? Or like that? What is this lady's face saying right here? So I want you to let me know in the chat box, or if you want to unmute yourself, what were some of the feelings you had as a result of looking at those?
Super uncomfortable.
Yep, discomfort. And think about what this would be like if this was, oh, anger, yeah. Yeah, if this was somebody you really loved, somebody you cared about, and they were pointing all of that intensity at you with their face, because there's like an energy that comes off of those, right? If somebody's in your face with that kind of energy, yeah, no listening's happening, definitely. What would that feel like? I want you to consider, based on like what you're feeling there and what you can imagine, what sort of other reactions would you have then? You notice they're feeling angry, but would you feel angry? Would you feel like maybe they weren't listening to you? When you see a face like this, from someone you love especially, it makes you feel unsafe. That kind of face makes you feel unsafe. And when you feel unsafe, what do you do next usually? Let me know in the chat box. Vicky, you're jumping ahead. Manipulate? Can you explain that a little more? Joe? Oh, let's see, Melanie? Yep. It can kind of like impact your ability to breathe when you get that kind of intense energy sent at you, right?
Yeah, you start feeling defensive, I think. And then you want to try and like prove your own worth or your own point, or you all of a sudden have an agenda in the conversation of defensiveness that has to be addressed, or that you feel like has to be addressed.
Right. Melanie said, I push buttons until I get my husband to talk to me. Right? It's uncomfortable. It elicits a response out of us. So the interesting thing there is, they do something, we feel unsafe, and then we respond with maybe anger, trying to push buttons. What does it look like to them? Like, what message is our face and our body language and our tone conveying? basically the same feeling as the thing that started it, right? So let's consider that. What is the environmental trigger that caused us to feel unsafe in these instances? What do you think? What was it about these spaces that made us feel unsafe?
We just feel attacked, I guess. We feel like it's an attack on us personally.
Yeah, Vicky mentions that one of the reactions is to feel disengaged. We can get angry, we feel vulnerable. Yep. And with these people with the faces, the main message I would say, let me switch over to my other screen. Here's our stick figures. One person feels unsafe, and that unsafeness, I would like to just, we can call it negativity. Whether it's anger or contempt, disdain, it feels negative when they point it at us. When they feel unsafe, they start to act unsafe, they act negatively. Move that out of the way. So then this person is sending out this negative feeling, and it hits us, and then that causes us to feel unsafe. And then we usually react, there's the reaction part, in the same way, negatively back. I think I spelled that right. Then we've created this feedback loop where whatever we're getting, we send back. So to make it really simple, negativity, I'm gonna draw this. Negativity leads to more negativity. That's a minus sign, in case you couldn't tell what the little dash was. Whatever we get, we tend to send back. That's the way it happens, right? It's very rare that someone's like, hey, you bleepity bleep, and we're like, hey, it's great to see you. How are you today, right? We typically react to what we see and what's in front of us. And if we see unsafety, we feel unsafe. When we feel unsafe, we act unsafe. And it continues and creates this positive feedback loop where negative leads to more negative, and it gets worse and worse and worse. And where does that end? If somebody doesn't stop it, I mean, it's like you bring a knife to a fist fight, and then it's guns, and then it's World War III. This can get really, really ugly very quickly. And why is this happening? Why is it that we are automatically tuned to react to unsafe negativity with our own negativity? Well, this goes back to our fight or flight response. As mammals, we have this baked into our DNA. We've been on the planet a long time, a very long time. And our ancestors have only been able to live long enough to pass on their genes to us because they were super aware of things that could go wrong. They're prone to be like more aware of negative things, bad things that could happen. And if somebody stepped up to them with unsafe negativity, they probably speared them or they ran away. Whether it's fighting or fleeing, these are both defensive reactions. It's the same thing. Fleeing can look less negative, but if your spouse reacts to you, like maybe you're criticizing them, maybe you're saying something that hurts you deeply, and they feel criticized by it, and you're like just trying to be heard. Maybe you're pushing their buttons because you want them to listen to you. If they distance themselves and move away, that feels unsafe. You know that feels unsafe, right? Either way, it's heads and tails on the same coin. This is all happening because that's how we're wired. This is what's kept our species alive. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that it kind of interferes with our life, because when we get in a conflict with a loved one, it's usually not going to be violent. We don't need to have the fight or flight reaction, but it's automatic. We don't have to think about it. You don't have to do anything to have your fight or flight reactions try to keep you safe. It's just going to happen, and that can be kind of frustrating. So that's the why. We have this wiring, and if we let it continue, we will just be automatic, unthinking, animalistic responses where we feel unsafe and we act unsafe. Somebody yells at us, we yell at them back, or we distance ourselves and run away. And if you look at our country, I see a lot of this happening right now. People are feeling unsafe, and there have been protests, and there have been riots. And if this keeps up much longer, there's going to be civil war, because we know how this ends. We know that if something doesn't stop the escalation, it's just going to get worse. So there's a cycle. We feel unsafe, we act unsafe. They see us being negative, then they feel unsafe and they react back feeling unsafe. And it's kind of the eye for an eye mentality. Oh, you put out my eye, I'll put out yours. The whole world is blind, right? Again, it's just like an instant animalistic response. If we could stop ourselves from feeling unsafe, we would basically be able to stop conflict right there. So the thing that makes us feel unsafe is other people's negativity, right? Cool. All we need to do then is just stop other people from being negative and we'll be fine, right? That's easy.
Sure.
Yeah, we laugh at that, right? But if you look at your life, I will bet you will find ways that you're trying to subtly influence other people or control them so that you can feel okay. It's just what we do as humans.
Can I make a comment, Kenneth?
Yeah, sure.
I put this in the chat, but I wanted to bring it up out loud too, so you can address it just a little bit. And maybe you're going there, but I think when we have those negative reactions, we react negatively to our perception of what they're saying, not necessarily to what they're actually saying. So if we've had a bad day, then something they say may seem a lot more aggressive than it really is, or we may just react more aggressively than was called for because of what they said. So I guess you're going to our reactions no matter what their intentions, but I just think it's good to recognize that when we have negative feelings, when we start feeling unsafe, it's not necessarily because we're actually being attacked. Our fight or flight can kick in, and does kick in a lot of the time when we are actually safe. We just don't think we are.
Right, yeah. I mean, we go on a hike, we see a stick that looks like a snake, and we get a rush of adrenaline, and we jump back, and we go, oh. I mean, that perception is what creates it, because a person can be totally chill, not going to hurt us at all, but if we think they will, yeah, that's kind of the problem.
And in my experience, some people, especially people who have been through trauma in the past and feel victimized in the past, it's really easy for us to, because it's a protective mechanism for us to assume we're being attacked and be on the defensive. It's really easy for us to start feeling like a victim and that fight or flight kick in as a protective mechanism, when really it's doing exactly the opposite for us because we're reacting that way. Anyway, I just wanted to.
Absolutely. That's the thing is, our survival response is very useful for staying alive in life or death situations. And so if we experience a lot of negativity, we can get conditioned, and then at the drop of the hat, we can launch ourselves into one of those cycles when there may not be a threat. Because what's the downside for survival? It's better to be overreactive than underreactive.
Right.
Sometimes I think I'm like way too chill, because I mean, you know, one time my car lost control on Christmas Day, and we're like doing donuts down the freeway at 50 miles an hour, and I'm like, oh, this will be fine. You know, it's better to be like more reactive, more aware, right?
Well, in some situations, in actual dangerous situations, but if you're hyper reactive and hyper aware to every situation, then that's going to have a much more negative effect, I think, than not being reactive and aware at all.
You'll be really good at surviving, but really miserable constantly.
What you said was so profound, I want to write it down. What did you say about, like, we try to make people do things so we feel safer?
When we don't feel like we can control ourselves, we try to control our environment.
I'm sorry, I'm writing that down.
Kenneth does that all the time, by the way. Every couple minutes, he'll say something super profound, and I'm like madly scribbling. And then he just keeps going because he doesn't realize how profound he's being.
Okay,
I've
sorry.
done that in pretty much every class I've been in with him.
Okay, thank you. I got it written down.
Well, there's a lot of that we do, and that's our default. The environment's unsafe. Let's make it a safe place. But then that usually involves trying to control other people, their reactions, their feelings.
Right. The defensive mechanisms that we've developed are sometimes, like Melanie was saying earlier, manipulative or controlling or whatever it is. And it's not that we want to be manipulative. It's that that's a mechanism that we've learned helps us to feel safer when we can control something about our environment or try to. And we have to be aware of that so we're not necessarily doing it.
It's like maybe we're feeling unloved. And so we kind of like hint that our spouse should do something to make us feel loved because it would be proof that they care about us. But then because we were the ones kind of pressuring them into it, we're like, oh, well, they only did it because I tried to force them to do it.
Right.
And then we still just feel the same. So we do that quite a bit. And so Wendy brought up the next point we need to talk about here, because when you see someone else's face being negative, it makes us feel unsafe. And there may be a very good reason for that. But it's not necessarily just their face. Yes, we are wired to automatically respond that way, but it's not a life or death situation usually. So the thing that makes us feel unsafe is not necessarily other people's negativity, but it's the story that we tell ourselves about what their face means. When you see an angry person, it usually makes you immediately go, oh, I'm under threat, because anger leads to violence. Or if you see a dog barking at you, you think, oh no, that dog's going to bite me. But if you change your story, it's a totally different experience. I used to walk to school, and when I was walking up the hill, South Junior High in Ogden, there was this dog that would constantly run out, and it was a little yappy dog. It would run out like, and I would just stare at it like, really? Well, I started learning a little bit about how mammals communicate, and I know that it's all about body language, and it's about eye contact. And so I decided one day I was going to try this out on the dog. It's trying to puff up the chest and look like it's really powerful and scary so that I would leave it alone. And so this dog ran out one day, and I turned, and I stared him in the eyes, and I went, I just started barking at the dog. Immediately like put on the brakes and turned around so fast to run away. He smacked his head on a pole in the yard, and he was out of there. I felt kind of bad, but not too bad. The story I told myself about that dog was, he's a coward. He's just trying to scare me off, and I can turn this around. It's not the things that happen to us. It's the story we tell ourselves about what happens to us. So your genes are going to automatically supply you with a story that's going to be adaptive for survival. And we've got to be able to recognize, hang on, this is just a story. Even though it feels right, like when you feel unsafe, it feels real because those emotions are very real. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the story is accurate. When I say story, I'm not saying that we're sitting there and in our mind going, oh, well, this situation means that I'm unsafe because this angry person might hit me. This is an instantaneous gut reaction. It's not conscious. So in order to find the story, you kind of have to dig for it and kind of go like, what is my reaction here? And if I was gonna put this into words, what would it be? Well, let's do some practice. I'm gonna give you a scenario, and I want you to try to figure out what a story would be, an example of what might make you feel unsafe in this scenario. You're at work, your boss comes up, and they start yelling about what a crappy job you've done. What might be the story you're telling yourself that would make you feel unsafe there?
I always want to be the first one to talk. I always have something to say.
Somebody's got to go first. Wendy.
Anybody else? I don't know. I think, well, I mean, obviously the first thing you tell yourself is, oh, I screwed up. But then if you're me, then you jump to, well, I must have done a terrible job. Somebody noticed, they've complained. Now I'm going to get fired. I'm not going to have a job. And then in my head, within a, nanosecond, I've gone to, how am I going to, help support my family? And because I'm going to get fired because I did this crappy job. And then I have to walk myself back out of that to deal with whatever situation is in front of me.
So that might be the end of it. Like, ultimately, a boss yelling can mean, oh no, I get fired. And why is that a problem? Because then I don't have money. And why is that a problem? Well, because then I can't afford groceries and I die under an overpass, addicted to meth, Or,
and Melanie says, I did a crappy job and he noticed, but he should have noticed the good stuff too. And I think that's a hard one, because I think it's so easy for people to get stuck in the negative that I think people do notice negative stuff so much faster and easier, and talk about the negative stuff way easier and faster than they talk about the positive stuff.
And then we feel unappreciated.
Yeah, for sure.
I was just going to say, my son ran into this at his work, that somebody got fired, and he is in charge of making sure that if there's any issues or problems, that he kind of helps to resolve those. That's kind of his current job. But a couple of people came to him and said, this is disconcerting because we thought that guy was doing a good job, and this could be us next week. I mean, maybe we don't know what we're doing. It just, it throws people into, wait, we thought he was doing a good job and then he was fired. Like, does this guy just fire people whenever he feels like it or whatever? So they had to kind of learn not to effectively communicate, but it really does kick in, especially with something big like a job. It really does kick in a fight or flight, kind of worst case scenario kind of response. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting because he said that was a scenario they found themselves in. So anyway.
What if your spouse comes at you and says, I'm so pissed off at you right now? What could the story be there?
My brain supplies like 50 reasons, 50 possible reasons, like anything that wasn't perfect today or in the last week, month, year, whatever, might be something that has come up for him now, because my mind is constantly providing data on what I should be doing better. So that feels scary.
So if the story is, I didn't do a good enough job on stuff, then what?
Then I'm not good enough.
There's a common thing. It can reflect not only on our relationship, because if they're pissed off, oh no, maybe they'll leave me. That can bring up fear of abandonment immediately.
Right.
But it can also, it touches on our shame button, and it brings up our deepest fears about ourselves. Like, oh, it's because I'm not good enough. And if I'm not good enough, then what's my life going to be like? Will I be miserable forever? A tiny little trigger can turn on that circuitry, because not being good enough, that's pretty like a universal general
Pretty all-encompassing.
Yeah. I was meeting with a couple this week in therapy, and he mentioned that she was kind of judgmental. She's super religious, and I was kind of watching her, and she started, I could see the signs of defensiveness there, and I helped her to express, like, hey, when he said you were judgmental, what did you think of? Like, what was your story there? And she said, I think it seems like he thinks I'm a bad person. There she is, feeling like her husband thinks she's a bad person. And if you think your spouse is a bad person, why would you be married to them? Like, it represents, even if they were to stay married, an incredible loss, because living with a constant judgment of someone, just like debilitating for your self-esteem. I found one of my stories pops up usually Sunday nights when I'm kind of in a low energy mode. I will immediately feel anxiety. So I'm having kind of a fear response, fight or flight, and I've gone through this a million times, so I can instantly find it. It took me a while. It took me some journaling to figure out what was going on. And I realized that in 4th grade, school got hard and it was scary. And when the sun goes down on Sunday night, it means Monday starting all over again. And I don't want to go back. And that persisted with me. It was just some baggage that carried over, and it's still somewhat a part of my life. So I have to be very aware of that when it pops up. Like, oh, my story is tomorrow's going to be scary, except tomorrow I get to be a therapist, and I like that. Then that changes everything. So in these scenarios we've looked at, if we allow ourselves to be reactive, if we allow the fight response to come up, our spouse says, I'm pissed off at you, and you say, well, I'm pissed off at you. You're not perfect either, That's not going to go a great direction. Or maybe our boss gets in our face and we punch him. or maybe we just withdraw and we pull away and we don't talk to them, and we're like trying to keep our head down, and then it drops a performance. Like, either way, sticking with our fight or flight response can lead to not great results for us. Again, when we feel unsafe, we act unsafe. And so if we want to start turning the cycle around, our first step in not reacting is to not feel unsafe. If we want to be non-reactive, we have to make sure that we feel safe. And that means we need to work on changing our stories. So I want you to get out something to write with, whether it's paper or your computer in front of you. I'd like you to think about the last couple of conflicts you've had. And maybe those conflicts weren't yelling at each other. Maybe you're in the type of relationship where there's just silence and you avoid conflict with each other. What are the things that made you feel a desire to move away? What are the things that hurt your feelings? What are your perceptions about the other person? Try to think of the last couple fights with the last few people maybe. I want you to write down what story you were telling yourself. I'll give you a minute to do that.
So we're writing down what the conflict was, and then what story we were telling ourselves about that conflict.
Yep.
What reactions we were having to that. Okay.
Yeah, specifically the story you told yourself that made you feel unsafe. So when the person yelled at you, or when the person gave you the cold shoulder, or when they gave you the stink eye, what were you telling yourself about what that meant? And if it's hard to think through that, I'll give you a couple of options. You may have felt like, I'm not being heard. They don't want to listen to me. They don't respect me. They don't love me. I'm a failure. They don't care about me. Is anybody having a hard time figuring out what their story is? If this is hard for anybody to figure out what it was in the moment, I could probably help you if you're willing to talk in front of everybody. Sometimes they're easier to find than others. Okay. Now, these stories are likely to be something that comes back again and again. We tend to have our tender spots, our vulnerable points. I've noticed there are some things that can just instantly trigger me. If somebody thinks I'm being insincere, it makes me feel very unsafe. And when you know what the common stories are you tell yourself, it's a lot easier to head them off at the pass. When you're aware of them, you can start doing something different with them. So knowing that your story is going to pop up, it's just going to be instinctive, it's going to be biased towards negativity, it's going to be all about protecting you, and it's not necessarily true, it's going to be a lot easier in those moments to try to come up with a new and better story. And that's what we've got to do. If we want to become non-reactive, we have to master the stories we're telling ourselves. If we want to stop conflict, we must be the master of stories. One of my favorite quotes from Viktor Frankl: between stimulus and response, there is a space. And that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. This to me is the difference between being an animal, like our genes gave us the inheritance of, the reactions of being a mammal. The difference between an animal and being a human, being conscious. Everybody has their reactions built in. But as we start to grow more in our humanness, in our consciousness, we're able to pause and go, wait a minute, how do I want to react? What story am I telling myself here? And how do I need to change that story so that I can get a different response out of my partner? When my wife snaps at me, my instant story is usually, I'm in trouble, she has the power to make me feel miserable, and I should run and hide in my man cave. Heidi's my wife, if I didn't mention that. That's my instant story. Oh no, she's attacking, run away. And it's a very common thing for men to do. Men are more sensitive to negative stimuli from their environment than women are. Women can usually handle it a little bit better. But that's why men hide in their man cave. If you've ever wondered why your partner is hiding, he's afraid of negativity. And it doesn't take much. We've all got these stories we tell ourselves. So I can do that and follow my natural reaction, or I can choose to remember the story that gives me power. Would you like to know what the story is that will give you power? Okay, I'll give it to you simply. Whenever anyone is acting aggressive or negative or unsafe in any kind of way, I want you to tell yourself, and I hope you write this down, they're only acting like that because they're in pain. They're only acting like that because they're in pain. I hope you understand how profound this is. This is one of the greatest keys to understanding human behavior. This will help you with kids, with friends, with a spouse, with a partner. When people act unsafe, it's because they feel unsafe. They're scared. Underneath the bluster, underneath the anger and the aggression, there's fear or there's pain. There's basically a hurt little kid that needs to be cared for and comforted. And starting to see the world through that lens is what has really started my transformation in being non-reactive. This is what allows me to get into political debates and keep my calm and have people attack me, do the ad hom attacks on me, and be okay with it, and to know, oh, they feel triggered because questioning their beliefs makes them question their identity and they're not ready to do that. This is okay. They're only acting like that because they're in pain. That one truth will do more to change you than anything else I can give you. When I noticed myself having these fight or flight responses and having the negativity, and even if it wasn't fight or flight, but just like a kind of a bitterness towards people, an anger, an enmity, a kind of hatred, a sense of opposition of like, oh, they're idiots. When I noticed I was in that kind of a space, and I remembered, oh, this is just because I feel kind of like unsafe or inferior, and I'm just trying to protect myself with this false bluster of pride and ego. I saw it through totally different eyes, and I thought, oh, this is pathetic. I don't want to be that kind of person who has ego and who has to respond with prideful haughtiness. I want to be a good, genuine human. I don't want to be reactive like an animal. And I think looking at it that way was really useful for me. I'm like, oh, this is silly. This is childish. I'm going to choose to be better. I'm going to choose to love everybody right where they are. And remember that if they are acting negatively and unsafe, it's only because they feel unsafe and negative, and they feel that way about themselves. So I want you to write this down. This is going to be your new mantra. Whenever anyone is acting unsafely around you, and you start to feel your own fight or flight response come up, first of all, take some slow breaths. Do it with me. Deep, full breaths. That calms down your body. And then to calm down your mind, you're going to say this. I am safe. They're only acting like this because they're hurting. And I need to help them feel better. I'll put it in the chat box.
I'm typing it in this chat box right now.
I'm safe. They're only acting like this because they're hurting. And I need to help them feel better. We don't want to live on the level of animal instincts. Because when we live at that low energy level, we're reactive and things are hard and they get worse. But if we wake up in the morning and choose to wake up and be conscious and to remember that people are going to act unsafely around us all day, and that's fine because we can be non-reactive. Totally different experience. Every morning, I pull out my mantra. One of them is, I'm not afraid of my wife being angry at me because I remember she's hurting and she needs me to comfort her. And I can tell you that establishes such an incredible sense of safety when you practice that kind of attitude towards people, that kind of compassion. It changes people's hearts and it makes them feel safe, and their trust builds in you. Whether it's a child or a partner or a family member, when you can be consistently safe with them, they start to trust you and then they feel safe around you. I remember a couple years ago, we got up and ran a 5K on Thanksgiving. It wasn't my choice, it was Heidi's choice. But I ran that with her. And she has a tendency to get hangry when she doesn't eat. And we got up, it was so early, like she didn't have any breakfast. So she ran an entire 5K and we came home and she started to feel some feelings. And I think she was getting upset about the potatoes we had to bring to the family dinner. I don't remember the details, but she was so mad. And I had decided to wake up and be conscious that morning. And so she's raging about potatoes. And I walked up to her with a soft and gentle face. And I got close to her and I reached out to touch her, to comfort her. And I was like, honey, what's wrong? What are you feeling? And she starts talking about potatoes. I'm like, no, what's really going on? How are you feeling? Seems like you're really upset. Seems like you're hurting. Can you tell me what you're feeling right now? Usually, getting a blowtorch to the face of emotions makes you turn away. My story was mastered. I knew that she was acting unsafe is because she felt unsafe. And I chose to listen and be a healer and to comfort her. And that calmed everything down, and we quickly realized, oh, she's just starving. That's what this is about. This is about food. And she ate, and she felt better. Now that, in the first year of marriage, could have been a totally different story. Because I would have been reactive. It would have been very ugly very quickly. But because I was willing to take the responsibility, not for her emotions, but the responsibility to help her. Because we're completely different. You've probably noticed the world is kind of going crazy right now. And it's because people are letting their stories run their lives and not the other way around. We need more non-reactive people out there. We need people who are willing to be conscious and to choose how they will react instead of defaulting to their instincts. The world needs healers who will step up We'll step into conflict with courage and create peace. And that begins in our own families. If you've been on social media lately, you know you are so needed. Things are just going to continue to get worse if we don't choose to be part of the solution. We need to help calm things down. We need to help people be less reactive, and it all starts with us. We will create safety in ourselves when we choose to master our stories. So again, every morning, I'm reading my mantra. I'm reminding myself that if anybody acts unsafe, it's only because they feel unsafe, and it's my job to help them. We need to be better people, and when we're better people and when we choose to grow, it helps everyone else around us grow and gain skills. And if we don't grow, relationships don't work. There are certain baseline requirements to make a marriage functional, and I think we need to talk about that more. It requires us to be non-reactive. And maybe you have been non-reactive, or maybe your partner's been more non-reactive. Anytime it's happening, we just need to see it for what it is. If we are reacting more, we need to remember that it's not fair, and they need help too. And we need to remember that the only way for things to really change is for us to grow. So this week's going to be different for you. This week, you know the stories that tend to cause problems, and you're going to start looking at people differently. When you see a kid freaking out in the grocery store, you'll know what's causing that. When you see people yelling at each other, you'll be able to go, oh man, they feel unsafe. When somebody's yelling at you, you're going to be ready for it, because you're going to wake up every morning and you're going to say your mantra. And that story is just going to be going through your head all day. I'm safe. If they're acting unsafe, it's only because they're hurting and they need me to help. And so when you get the blowtorch of emotions in your face, you're going to pause and you're going to take deep breaths and go, I'm safe. How can I help this person? And people around you are going to notice. You're going to be like, wow, that's new. I just threw that at you and you just took it. It's incredible. And they're going to start to feel safe. And they're going to start to trust you more. And in time, it will open up opportunities for you to develop deeper relationships with everyone you meet. And all it takes is a little consistency, remembering your story, remembering to breathe, and doing that as much on a daily basis as you can. You are going to be amazed at the difference this makes. Not maybe instantly. People need some time to build trust and to know that you're serious and you're legit. You're not just trying to trick them. But I can
And also to practice recognizing the stories that we're telling ourselves rather than distancing ourselves for a minute.
Exactly. And you know what? In the moment, you're probably not going to be able to do this. It takes some practice. What happens after you have the fight? You go sit down with your journal and write out your stories. And then when you're in a calmer, safer place, you can go talk to the person and say, hey, when this happened, when you said that, it made me feel really unsafe. I felt like you didn't love me. And if you say it in that gentle, quiet way, they're most likely going to go, oh, I didn't know that. I'm sorry. This is the beginning. It's not going to transform everything overnight, but man, this was the beginning for me. This is what started to make my life different. Stuff works. And I proved it in my own marriage. I've helped my clients prove that too in therapy. So it's simple, right? This is doable. You can track your stories. You can remind yourself you're safe. You can breathe. This is not rocket science, right? A little harder to do in the moment, but it's totally possible. Does anybody have any questions? First, specifically, any questions about applying this or something that I may have missed?
I had a question. Let's see, I don't have my video on, but okay, about healthy boundaries. I really appreciate all of this. This is really profound. I was wondering if you come across a person who, we talked a little bit about manipulation. You know, sometimes people are so, they've learned as a way of dealing with the feeling unsafe is to try to control their environment, try to control other people. When you're dealing with people like that who maybe are semi-manipulative, and obviously, I think there is pain behind their, actions, but sometimes they will try to make somebody responsible for their emotions, what they're feeling, or for even their actions. How do you help them deal with their pain and hold healthy boundaries where, you know, where it won't be a learned thing? Oh, I can make this person responsible for my, you know, pain, my, you know, my actions or whatever. Like, where do healthy boundaries come in that? I guess is just what I'm wondering, like, you know, like helping somebody, you know, validating them in their pain, but also holding the healthy boundaries. I don't know.
Not enabling that to be
Not
something that
enabling.
they use against you.
Right.
Good
Right.
question.
You know, I think every human manipulates to some degree. Almost everything we say is designed to get some kind of reaction out of a person. So there's kind of a benign manipulation, and then there can be more of the malignant type. It's important to know where the person is on that spectrum, because a lot of times we can write someone off as like narcissistic when really they don't have a personality disorder. They're just feeling, you know, deeply unsafe themselves. But you mentioned validation. That's so important. If you can help them to feel safe, then you can help them start changing their stories. But if they don't feel safe, they're going to slam right down and continue to blame. So I would start with that. Like, hey, it sounds like you're hurting, you're feeling this and that. Can you explain more? Try to be a good listener. If you can put that into words, like what they're feeling, like, yes, oh my gosh, they get me. Then you have the opportunity to be like, you know, I understand why you're hurting, but what you're doing right now is blaming. And the only way this is going to get better is if you take responsibility for how you feel. Because regardless of what happens to you, now it's your job to deal with the emotions. And you can obviously support and help someone through that, but you kind of just have to bring it up, and you need to make sure it's at the right time and in the right way, and whether the person's ready for it. But we definitely don't have to be doormats and let them walk all over us. It's okay to be firm and to not feel guilty when we say, that's not my responsibility. I love you and I care for you and I'm willing to help you with this, but this isn't my job. Does that make sense?
Awesome. Yeah. Thank
Yeah,
you.
good question.
Anything else? Questions about this or anything else in general? You can ask me about astrophysics if you really want.
Kenneth's a Renaissance man. I have a sort of question, comment. I think sometimes when we get in a cycle of doing this with somebody that we have a relationship with, some of the things that we know are hurtful to us or that they know are hurtful to us become ways that they can manipulate us. And so I think that recognizing our vulnerabilities in that area can help us to be more aware. Because I think sometimes, for example, one of my kids will, they know that I've felt neglected somewhat by my own mom as a kid, and that's a hurtful thing to me. And so I think as a defense mechanism, when he feels hurt, he will pull back from me and or complain to me that I don't love him enough or pay him enough attention, or accuse me of being like my mom, which he knows is super painful and knows will come right through any defenses that I have, because I worry so much about traumatizing my children and making their lives depressive by my actions. And so I think sometimes when we have relationships with people, we get into those cycles of doing the things that we know are hurtful when we're hurt, and then they do things. I mean, I don't know, how do we A, how do we start recognizing that we're telling ourselves unhealthy stories? And B, how do we, because I feel like that Viktor Frankl quote that you gave was really profound, but I feel like sometimes, especially when you're in kind of a long-term relationship with somebody, that space gets really small because our reactivity is so ingrained. So how do we start recognizing that the stories we're telling ourselves are either not true or not healthy, and how do we start changing that? I guess one thing is you just need to tell yourself, okay, they're hurting, and or they wouldn't be reacting that way. But how do we recognize that the stories that we're telling ourselves are wrong?
The highest and most useful purpose for a journal is not to write what you had for dinner last night so that your grandkids can go, why did they write this? But to explore your inner world. If you will diligently seek to understand your own reactions, the patterns in your life, if you will write it down, you will gain so much. I always say that if you're journaling every day in this way, you almost don't need therapy at all, because you're being self-aware. And so it starts with looking for what emotions you're feeling. What are the emotions that are dominating your life? And anywhere you find a negative feeling, I can guarantee there's probably going to be a little bit of a twisted story underneath it.
Okay.
So I'll wake up in the mornings and I will do a tranquility check. And that's just my thing where I sit down and I go, how do I feel? Am I in a state of perfect tranquility? Yes. All right. Well, let's go on with the day. And if the answer is no, I go, okay, what's causing this? Why am I feeling? What am I feeling? What's the emotion? And I try to figure out the story behind it.
Okay.
But that can be a challenge, because we are all in the habit of ignoring our feelings constantly because they're uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we ignore them, the stronger they get. And they just get worse. Becoming friends with your emotions is one of the best things you can do. So that would be the beginning. Start to be aware of your emotions through writing. Then you can find your stories and work from there.
Okay, good answer.
Did I answer both of them?
I think so. I think that answer covers both of them.
Okay. Like